Welcome everybody to SDC 2019. I don't know if I'm supposed to give some introductory words to welcome you to the Storage Developer Conference this year. Otherwise, I just will go ahead and open the SMB track for this year, which is, well, good morning. And it's really an honor really to be the first presenter here this morning. Hope everybody is kind of awake. I am, mostly. So I will try to give an entertaining presentation of what's new in Samba. And while working on this, it was really interesting then, and I had to actually look up for the definition of what is new in order to determine what still qualifies to be put into the talk and what is maybe, 4 or 5 years, that's probably not new anymore. So, well. The agenda is, I'm first going to look into what's new in Samba tooling, what's new in our infrastructure code, what's really new in the file server. This is probably the most interesting part here for everybody. That's also the largest part of the presentation. I have a few words to say about what's new in Clustered Samba, and a few words on Samba Active Directory implementation as closing words. So if I'm missing anything that you developed as Samba and I'm not mentioning in the talk, please speak up at the end. And if you have any corrections, anything is wrong, and you know it because you wrote it, speak up, raise your hand, and we'll fix that. So tooling, what's that? CI, everybody know what is CI, continuous integration? We adopted GitLab for our continuous integration about 12 months ago, like a year, 15 months ago, last year. And this has mostly been a very successful story, I believe. And this is intensively used by the Samba team, but it's open to external contributors, actually. So anyone, any external contributor who says, hey, I have some patches that I actually want to test, and I actually want to run like the full Samba test suite that we have. You just have to sign up for a GitLab account, and you can run it. So this is really, really nice. And by now, and I mean, this is now just a year, we are already at like 800 merge requests and 4,000 runs of the CI, which they call pipelines in GitLab lingo. I mean, and that's like 24/7, like more than 10 a day. So I think we're keeping this thing really busy. So this is now really the kind of one point we use for reviewing our code and testing it. Previously, we were kind of like really mailing list based, so everybody just had a patch that it threw it on the mailing list. Hopefully, he did some local make test or something. Probably didn't run the full Samba test suite that we have. Maybe he did by using our spinning Rust that we still have somewhere, where you could run like kind of what we call private auto builds, which did run the full test suite. But this was often not done. So sometimes you ended up with patch set that then you reviewed and you thought, hey, this at least passes the test that covers the area of the code change, but then you realize, oh, it broke something totally, which you thought was totally unrelated. But there you go. And so this is used by us, like kind of for every small patch, by me, for every small patch that I write, I just send it to GitLab and say, hey, build it, run it, and tell me if it's good or not. And being able for external contributors to also use them means it helps us really to, if we get to review a code from external contributors, that we know then at that point, okay, that passes the full CI. So I can then now look safely at the code without noticing that it breaks anything else later on. It's still not used for the final merge. So on GitLab, in theory, you could have like a merge button where you say, okay, now push the changes into our main branches. We don't do that yet. We might be going there, I don't know, soon, maybe. But currently, we still have kind of a separate machine that still runs then another CI run, another auto build, before it then pushes to our public Git repository. Yeah, it's really only rarely, at least by Samba team members, it's very rarely that patches are still submitted on the mailing list. A few of our team members are still doing that, but I think mostly we are on GitLab right now, right? So it's really nice. And at the beginning, I was also kind of a little bit like, oh no, this web thingy and this won't work out. I'm used to using mud and having the patch there and saving it away and then applying it, so being all on the command line all the time. But you actually can do that with the help of a few Git functions. You can actually like fetch patches from the merge request and then work completely from the command line as well. So that's quite nice. Yeah, so I think we recently had some discussion how to prominently explain on the Samba wiki or wherever it is how our contribution process for Samba is, and we had some discussion about about the wording, how we accept external contributors, and we kind of settled on saying by now that yeah, you can still send patches by the mailing list. I think initially there was a proposal to just say, hey, you have to use GitLab. You have to sign up. You have to make sure that you pass our test suite, and then do a merge request. We won't go there. Probably never will, because we just really want to give external contributors drive-by contributors the possibility to just say, I have a patch, I send a mail, and then let's start the review process. Something very, very nice, this work done mostly by Metzer, I believe, that our CI runtime, which went up over the years, from 1 hour to 2 to 3, and at the end, I think it was like 4 hours. 5? 5. Oh my God, so 5. And by adding more parallelization to the pipelines, splitting up tests to run in a more parallel kind of fashion, we went down to 1 hour. So now it's actually usable that you push something out and you get back a result within an hour, which really helps improving the turnover process. Okay. Any questions so far on the GitLab stuff? Oh, Steve, yeah.
So when Ronnie and Aurelia added automation on the client, we caught maybe a regression a month or every other month, and it's pretty good. I mean, it's shocking. We caught a lot of regressions. How many regressions do we catch?
I mean, we catch regressions every time, I think, because it's just, I mean, the code base is so large, and I mean, like for me, it feels like kind of every time I change something there, you break something somewhere else. So, and without having this really big test coverage in Samba, I think these days it would be impossible to do any changes, because I mean, you would always break something somewhere. So this really, really, really helps, having such good test coverage. Yeah. Anything else? No. Okay, so let's move on. Just highlighting a few things we have new in our infrastructure core. There's probably more. I just want to point out two very nice things we have now, and that's moving to GNU-TLS for our encryption stuff. Up until now, just very recently, we had all this crypto stuff. We had our own implementations for everything. And now Andreas Schneider from Red Hat, he started working on moving to GNU-TLS for doing the encryption. And now I think he removed nearly all of it, like AES stuff, MD5, SHA, RC4. Those two are left, DS and MD4, because you don't have that in GNU-TLS. And it's kind of the sad news. The Samba Active Directory Domain Controller still uses, it uses Heimdall for the KDC, and that has its own cryptography completely. complete directory full of shitload of cryptography implementations, and he didn't get around to convert that as well, because I mean that would have to be done in Heimdall upstream, and we are not actually using kind of Heimdall upstream. We have our own private copy. We have in-tree, so yeah, future work. But this is, I think, this is really, really, really a great step forward, isn't it? So really, not doing cryptography on our own, but just relying on a standard industry product like NuTLS. So that was cool, I think. RPC. Good that you're here, Samuel. It's your work. Currently we have 2 complete RPC implementations. We have 2 servers, and we also have 2 clients. Duplicate stuff. So we have and that means like the RPC front ends, but also all the services. We have duplicate implementations of all the services. And some bits are missing, maybe in one piece or in the other one. And as far as the file server is concerned, we have the problem that the RPC implementation used by the file server doesn't support async RPC requests, which is kind of a requirement for witness. And this new async, is it new anymore? I don't know. What's the definition of new again? MSPAR, printer asynchronous protocol. Is that right, Günther? Yeah, okay. So we can't do witness in MSPAR because we don't have an async RPC server. I remember Günther hacked something in the RPC server code to kind of use the source 4 RPC code from the file server, and it supports it in order to be able to work on a witness prototype. But it's kind of a Frankenstein monster. So we have to get that right. And luckily, Samuel here from SUSE has been taking the steps. He has been working on it. And my understanding is, hopefully Metze, he explained it to me. I had to ask a few questions there. How are we going to do it? So we take one RPC server front end from the source 4 implementation, which is the implementation used by the Active Directory domain controller, and we drop the other one, right? Good. We keep the independent service implementations, and just then the front end calls into one of the implementations, depending on the context, being it the Active Directory domain controller or like the source 3 file server. So large chunks of preparatory work cleanup is already upstream, being included in Samba upstream in like a year ago or half a year ago or something like that. So, and the full merge code is something like a prototype stage, and hopefully ready for the next release, 4.12. Looking forward. Okay, all right. So yeah, that will really, really help us. For witness MSPAR, I'll mention that again later, but I mean that's obvious, right? Really that. So yeah, moving on to what's in the file server. Did I miss anything of your cool code? Any of you Samba developers in the infrastructure library stuff or something that I should mention now? Oh, not really? Okay. All right. So yeah, let's move on. So what do we have in the file server? Woohoo! We've done it. We didn't remove it, but we disabled it. So the code is still there. You can switch it back on with disabling it by default. I mean, would be yes, great. Would be cool to do this kind of stuff that Microsoft did. If it's not used, remove it after 4 weeks or something like that. So yeah, that's really nice. It will be, I think, one of the real challenges for really removing the code is that many of our tests are actually written in SMB1. So if you just remove the SMB1 server, we lose test coverage. I think we'd lose serious test coverage. So probably all those tests have to be rewritten, and I think someone promised to work on that some time ago. But we'll see. Yeah. Sorry? Put it on the list. Yes, I will do. Queuing. Okay. So, and by the way, just to mention that, so we're getting rid of all cruft. NTLM-v1 is disabled since 3 years, since 2016. LAN authentication and clear text passwords, oh my God, just got depreciated with the latest release, 4.11, which was released, I think I'm going to mention that somewhere later, just a few days ago, 17th of October, like 6 days ago. They are now depreciated and will be removed with the next release, right? I think some, there's mentioned in the release notes that you have to speak up and raise a bug if you want to keep it, but I think we will be closing that box and say, go away, we will be removing it. So next, some water. Scalability improvements. So what do we do? What's the problem here? What's to say? So we have this subsystem in Samba which is called the Gencache, and it's kind of a generic cache system that is used by Samba, for example, for storing name to SID translations, ID mapping stuff, and for other stuff that essentially any high level components that wants to cache anything uses Gencache, which is fast generally until it has to do a so-called stabilized run, which had to be done every configurable configurable number of modifications to the Gencache. I think it defaulted to 100. I think many downstream consumer changed that to like 1,000 or 10,000. I don't remember the actual number, but anyway, so we had this stabilized, and that one was expensive because it took a global lock. It had to go over the full database, all the cache records, move it from one database to another one, because in the real implementation, the Gencache actually used two so-called TDB databases. So, and this could go off. Yeah, if you have really contention on that cache. We saw problems. We saw deadlocks. Well, I mean, I'm saying we, but Volker did. So this is kind of Volker's work, really great stuff. So the solution was add protection to the lower level data structure, adding hash chain loop protection to our lower level TDB database structure, and checksum the Gencache records. With those two changes, Volker was able to really re-architect how the Gencache uses the underlying TDB databases in Samba by going away from using like two databases and doing moving records from one database to the other one in this so-called stabilized one. So when just using one database, and we got rid of that stabilized one. And this is a really, really, really low-level change, but from a scalability and reliability perspective, this is really, really nice to have. So very good. So next one. And this is just, I don't know, this got merged upstream like 2 weeks ago or 1 week ago. This is really, really new stuff. We have this problem of contention on single files or directory being opened by many clients. And many, I mean like a few thousands. Opening, for example, the share root directory. So you have a server and you have 5,000 Windows clients. Windows Explorer will open the base share directory. So you have some kind of 5,000 opens sitting in that directory. In the Samba, that means we have a database record that stores this state information. And this record will have 5,000 entries. And every time we change this record, because there comes in a new open or an existing one is closed, we have to parse all this huge record, and we're using NDR marshalling there. So this gets really, really expensive. And cause performance issues and we've seen that just recently, a new open comes in and it gets stuck and blocked for 2 seconds before the SMB request with the create opening the directory gets processed and the client gets its answer. So what Volker did, he will present in a later talk, he improved the performance by a factor of X. And he will disclose the value of X and the gory details. I'm not disclosing that now.
It's a big number.
It's a big number, yes. Ooh, so Any questions on that, maybe? On that scalability stuff. Otherwise, next item here is some interesting stuff. It's about adding async path-based VFS functions. We have async I/O functions in our VFS for really, really long. I tried to go through the Samba history, going back to Samba 3.2 or 3.0, and I still saw async I/O, which is used for read, write, and fsig, so handle-based I/O operations. But we ran across performance issues in the last years where we saw, for example, that when clients enumerate a directory, large directories with a few hundred, few thousand files, we have to fetch an extended attribute from every file because we store like the Windows attributes in that extended attribute by default these days. So we have to read an extended attribute for every file. And especially, I think I mentioned that in one of the next year bullets. For example, like with fuse-based file system, this can really suck. They are slow on this often. So we do it all fully sequential, processing every directory entry fully sequential. All the extended attribute calls end up being sequential. So performance for an emerging directory really, really sucks. So we wanted to get this parallelized, ideally. And we already have this thread pool subsystem in Samba, which is used for the handle-based I/O stuff. So we thought, okay, so how can we do handle-based functions using a thread pool? And the problem is impersonation. In Samba, the SMBD, we have like a process model where you have one process, in theory, per user context that logged in initially to the file server. So in theory, you would say, okay, I have this process that just sets its user ID and group IDs and be done. Why do you change that? Well, we do because, for example, we have these nice configuration options where you can say, here is a share where I want to run as a specific user. I think it's called force user or something like that. And there's also the case of a terminal server, where one terminal server serves multiple sessions. So in Samba, that all ends up in one SMBD process serving sessions of different users. So for every SMB request that we process, we change impersonation. So the problem is then now, maybe the process changed the impersonation state, and then the thread gets scheduled to do its handle-based operation. And so we have to ensure that once that thread is started and does anything on the file system, that it does the impersonation again. So this is the problem that has to be solved. And you, of course, okay, you pass the user token to the thread pool. The thread does the impersonation then, and so on. This, of course, requires kernel support for per-thread credentials. Otherwise, if the thread changes credentials, you kind of nuke the whole process, which you don't want to do. And I think so per-thread credentials, is it still Linux only, or does FreeBSD have it? Linux only. So if your operating system does not have that, we go sequential in the implementation. We detect that and say, okay, we better don't do that in the worker thread. We have to do it sequential. So by now we have like one or two async path-based VFS function. That's the one, get those attributes. That's the one I mentioned for reading the DOS attributes from a file, which is then especially helpful in the enumerating directory case. And that gave, yeah, some decent improvement. I don't remember the number, but while working on it, I had like I wrote an artificial test case where I added a delay to the worker threads implementation of the get etc call. Just saying, okay, do a use sleep 5,000, so sleeping for 5 milliseconds, and then the numbers was so to simulate a slow file system. Right, I added the sleep there. And so that gave me an enumerating directory of 5,000 files, something like 60 seconds. And and removing the sleep, and so testing how it behaves if it's really going faster, and it was something like 2 or 3 seconds. That's kind of an artificial test, but we've really seen file systems at customer sites that are that slow for get, etc. So that helps.
You may mention the unshared clone FS.
Yeah, maybe. You're going to mention it in your presentation? Because in theory, I didn't want to go too deep into the details here because I wanted to leave some of the stuff for you. Right? Okay. Yeah, there you go. Last bullet point. So Mats is going to give a presentation on this stuff as well. I think he's next, or sometimes Sunday later on. So what's next? Any other questions on this? Oh, Steve.
You mentioned the other async, right? The async RPC stuff earlier. Currently, which feature is that enabled? Which subsystems required that, right? It was a
Witness.
witness.
And MS PAR, the printer asynchronous.
Self-attuned witness
something.
protocol sounds much more interesting. Did
Yes.
you mention the status of that, or do you mention it later?
I think so. Status of witness? Yeah. I have a kitchen sink later on. Yeah.
Okay, good.
So file server as a domain member in Active Directory or whatever. And we have simplified support for trusts as domain member. So the problem was the old code in WinBind, which is kind of like the thing that does the work for us when being joined to a directory domain. When being joined into a domain that has trusts, we relied on being able to enumerate the trust and really get a full view on a trust topology, and internally have a list with all domains that are on all the trusts. And this had to work recursively across all forest trusts. And we really went like, okay, we scanned the first trust for a list of domains, and then we asked for forest trusts, and we went, okay, here's a forest trust, so I go and try to talk to the domain, the domain controller of that forest, and ask again for all domains in that forest, and so on. And if we weren't able to connect to a domain controller in a forest, which you often can't, because you're not allowed, you don't have the credentials, you are blocked by firewall or whatever, we're not able to enumerate the domains. We can put them in our internal domain list, which means users from that trusted forest domain can't authenticate to Samba. So that was a problem, which larger installations ran into frequently. It's just broken by design. So the idea was, what can we do? Well, we just wait until some user from such a trusted domain authenticates the Samba server, and when the authentication is successful, we say, hey, okay, there's a new domain we now just learned about, and we make this kind of more dynamic process, and we just add that domain to our internal list. And so we're not relying anymore on this recursive enumerating. So we could add a new option, which says, okay, do we do this scanning of trusts at startup? Currently still defaults to yes, because we were a little bit scared to really say, okay, we set it to no, we don't do that anymore. What else might break? And I think one example was Kerberos authentication with PAM. We're working on that, and so maybe with one of the next releases, we might actually say, okay, turn that off. And while working on that, we learned that actually many administrators kind of rely on being able to see this list of trusted domains on the command line. So we have this command wb-info -m --verbose, which prints the list of domains that we know about. So previously, or still with the default option, when we scan the trusted domain list, those would show up here. If you set it to no, they won't. So this is here from a machine that is actually part joined to to a forest that has a few forest trusts. But the only thing you see here is for the list of domains. Of course, we have kind of built-in domain. Titan is the name of the workstation. So it's the local sum. And this is the primary domain we're joined into, and nothing else. So the administrator might say, hey, where are my domains gone? But this is how it will look like if you don't use the new scanning anymore. But once users authenticate, all those down there get added on the fly. Just whenever a user from a new domain is authenticated, we add it in the list and then we print it. So some administrators might get confused. I think Günther, he's been asked for this many times in the past, where people come to him and say, hey, my domains are not showing up here, and we info them. So this will probably get worse once we change the default here.
Shall we do a fallback?
Sorry?
So shall we do the fallback? And if you do that with minus verbose, just do the
Then trigger the scan. Yeah, but it's still broken by design. Yeah, sure. Yeah, we could do that. Hide that behind a But the question is, it would take some time maybe to really get the enumeration. So you would be sitting there waiting for the result. But yeah, sure, we could do that. Yeah.
Can you summarize that for the recording?
So Volker said if we could do that like just by request. So when the user on the command line really says, okay, with some command, and maybe the command we have for that, vbinfo -m verbose, then we just start the request to get the trust topology overview. So what's upcoming? Okay, so you go back here, Jeremy.
So Ralph, do you just want to mention the update to in the file server piece? Do you want to mention the update to the VFS to move to the open group at functions? Because I mean, it won't make any difference when it's done, but it will at least modernize the VFS so that we're actually following the open group standard rather than the old.
Yes. So we're kind of now moving to using the add functions of the add variants of syscalls and plumbing that into our VFS.
It's not going to make any difference. People won't notice a difference, but it's one of those modernization things that needs doing. I'm hoping to get that done by the end of the year.
Okay, yeah, it's just so just to repeat that again for recording. So we're now moving to standardizing our VFS on using the add function, the add variants of syscalls through open add and make-dir add and whatnot, fstat add, and removing all the other ones and like kind of modernizing our VFS by doing that. Yeah, so that's kind of ongoing work that will probably take a few more months to get done. So maybe that's a part then of the next release 4.12 or something. So if you have any custom VFS modules, you have to prepare for that. So other upcoming things. Currently for encryption. So this is about encryption. Samba still, so we support both encryption modes, the newer AAS, GCM and CCM, but Samba currently, oh, sorry, I forgot your question. So is it still about the, that one? Okay, so go make, sorry.
You mentioned that cluster domains now will be on demand and user authenticates. So what happens like if a user, a party user coming in for a non-existing domain, so we end up making a query to DC to check?
Okay, sorry, can you speak a little bit louder?
So when a faulty user comes in, like where some non-trusted domain user comes in, so with bindy make a query to DC to find if the domain is trusted or not?
Well, Winbound, we just pass on the authentication request to the domain controller.
Okay, so
And if the answer from the domain controller is authoritative for us. And if authentication succeeds, then we add it. If it fails for whatever reason, we just say go away and don't add it.
only based on successful authentication?
Yes, only on successful authentications.
Okay.
Yes.
So another thing is like now with on-demand addition, so the auto-read algorithm, like your backend is auto-read, let's say in a cluster system, so where one node, the user authenticated on node 1, like from trusted domain 1, gets the first next allocated range for that ID, right, domain range, and say if another domain, like secondary domain user authenticates to node 2,
because the autorit, the information about ranges in autorit is distributed in the cluster.
Correct.
So the range information is available to the whole cluster.
Yeah, but it again depends on like which trusted domain is authenticating first. You will get that range allocated. Is it not the case?
Sorry?
CTDP pushes the information to all the nodes.
Yeah.
So on node 1, I get in, I get my range, everybody else knows about it immediately.
Yeah, that means it's a distributed
Okay,
database, so the whole cluster knows about that
got it.
when a range is allocated, right? So this information is not stored on one node, and all the other ones don't know about it. That's the notion of clustered database in Samba, what we have that for when using CDB. Sorry? Persistent databases, yeah, sure. Okay, any question? Okay, bye. Oh, by the way, how much time do we have left?
8 minutes.
8 minutes, oh my God, so hurry up, but we're getting close. So what's upcoming? Yeah, encryption. So currently Samba prefers the older encryption, Cipher CCM, over GCM because our current own implementations that we have before we are moving to GNU-TLS was slower. Actually, it's supposed to be faster, but it was slower. So we kind of had this hack where we say, oh, we prefer CCM. But moving to GNU-TLS, we can change that because with GCM will be faster when you're using GNU-TLS. I don't know how much, but faster. Andreas, who implemented that, gave a presentation on that at Samba XP this year. So there are some very nice slides on the Samba XP website in the archive. So if you want numbers, you have to look there. Steve.
My recent testing was about double for the writes, a little bit less for reads. From Linux, but probably better for Windows. So large writes double.
When testing against what systems, what server? Against Samba.
Yeah, against
Double.
Yeah, so
Right.
I guess what I'm saying is that,
Yeah.
that obviously Windows could do better, but,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
double is something pretty amazing. And that was on the right cut, less for
Yeah,
reads.
yeah, so good.
And I think Windows is going to be better, so if you have data on that, I'd love to see it.
Yeah. So for the recording, Steve just said that in his testing, numbers doubled with GCM SMB311 Cipher. We're going to have a new impersonation model in Samba. So I've touched this before. Are we changing user stuff in Samba? Mats is going to talk about that in a subsequent presentation. We have SMB multi-channel in the last stages, and hopefully, Günther, by 4.12. That's one of the things we've been to Microsoft in Redmond last week, and we sat there working on some of that stuff, and Günther also worked on, continued working on multi-channel a little bit. We're making progress. We moved a few blocking rocks out of the way that we still saw there. So maybe, hopefully, by the next release, we have something ready. It's still marked experimental, so I mean the code is already there, but it's still marked experimental because we have a few subtle issues there. So if you really wanted to use it in production, you better wait until we declare it as production ready. SMB direct and persistent handles. We've been working on that last week, looking at the code that we have. We have working prototypes, but these are really very large changes. So both still require serious effort to get that finalized and upstream. But we have something, so hopefully over time we get that. Witness, I mentioned this before. That's an RPC service. I don't know if anyone is really familiar with the term witness. The witness is an RPC service used in clustering. And we actually have an implementation of that server done by Günther Deschner from Red Hat. But that is currently blocked because we're waiting on the DCR server code merge. All right, so what's next? SMB project extensions. Jeremy? So I think we have consensus on the spec there, right? You and Steve. Still? Oh no, we don't. Oh my God.
Last week we discovered something new, that the Windows system, subsystem for the Linux system for Windows. The Linux on Windows thing, they changed something, so we
All right.
need to adapt to that.
What did they change?
They changed the repass tag times
All right.
being returned.
So we have to adapt.
We have to take a look and see how we can adapt to that. So we're close to consensus.
All right.
It makes redirect faster because they're already returned as a tag.
So you don't have to do
it's
an
faster.
extra query to query one.
All right, okay.
But that means code changes and spec changes.
And spec changes, yeah. So yeah, we're making progress, client and server. It's also getting late by other important work, but I think 2020 should be the year of the POSIX extensions, hopefully. Yeah, hopefully, okay. Yeah, so what's missing? Direct releases? This would be really, really good to have. I just got some numbers from Mr. George, I think from Microsoft last week, where he said you get a decent reduction in the number of SMB requests you get from a client in metadata-heavy workloads, like 10 or 20%. So a must-have, but currently no one is working on it. So yeah, that would be nice if someone can pick that up. And like SMB compression, which is probably a smaller chunk, currently no one is working on it. So that would be nice if anyone here would take a step on it.
Sure, that's going to happen at the moment.
And just while sitting there and having finished by the end of the presentation. Right, so go. So what's new in Clustered Samba? That's basically one thing I want to mention here. I mean, the CDB developers are really actively working on it all the time, and there are boatload shit of patches that are getting upstream all the time. Many is, as far as I can see, for test and test infrastructure codes and all that kind of weird stuff that we will see the benefit probably in a year or two, where they will then come out and say, okay, these are now the high-level changes that we're going to see, like separate daemons and stuff like that. But it's really, from all of that changes, there's nothing really that you would notice if you set up a system, unless this one. So this there was a substantial change in the release that got released a year ago, 4.9, where the configuration of CDB completely changed. So whenever you're looking at upgrading a clustered Samba from a release before 4.9 to 4.9 or newer, you have to be careful. Configuration change there. We have a migration script which does a very good work at giving you guidance of how to configure it in the new style. And it's, of course, it's any style config that you're familiar from smb.conf. So yeah, kind of a nice cleanup. Because before we had all this information cluttered over basically shell config files that got sourced from shell scripts and all that. So that was kind of weird and easy to get wrong. So consolidating on here like file cddb.conf in any style, that's quite kind of neat. Yeah. Any questions maybe on that? That's not. Okay, move on. So final words. What's new in Samba Active Directory? I think the news is that like we are now ready to scale to 100,000 users and more in Active Directory implementation. Does everybody actually know that we have a Samba Active Directory implementation? Anyone does not know that, so we have that, right? And it's with the latest release, it should really scale now. So how do we get there? So historically, many services just ran as a single process, like the RPC server, the LDAP server, the KDC. And with the latest release, all that is now completely pre-fork. So we have worker processes that tell all the new connections. And replication was always a problem, DRS. Supposedly around linked attributes. I'm not really familiar with all this Active Directory stuff. I just want to give this really prominent place to mention this because it's really great stuff, I think. So replication was always going nuts at some points, maybe if you have larger installations, but this should really scale out now. The LDAP database uses a new indexing scheme under the hood. We have actually now support for using a different low-level database to implement our LDAP database in Active Directory. We still use by default and have used since the beginning the Samba Trivial Database TDB to implement that. We now have experimental support for using the lightning fast database, and I think it's MDB, sometimes called LNGB. We have a new indexing mode to support lesser than and greater than equality searches and indexing. So this is supposedly really get you there for large installations. Yeah. Any questions on that?
Probably should say people are running that in production.
Yeah. So just Jeremy said that people are running this in production at that scale. And we have also enhanced support for trusts here in the Active Directory domain controller, similar to how we enhance support for trusts as a file server. We have that enhanced support for trust now also as the Active Directory domain controller. We didn't have really support for full trusts with Kerberos and TLM for authentication. That got addressed, so both Kerberos and TLM authentication are now supported. You can actually add users and groups of a trusted domain into local domain groups. We don't support yet SID filtering and no selective authentication, which really means both sides of a trust have to fully trust each other. So you don't have any boundaries you can put in and say that where you can restrict an administrator from a foreign domain to from a trusted domain to configure himself as being administrator in your domain. All right, and that's it. So any questions? Anything I missed? Any important news?
One thing that confused me in the beginning of your presentation, you were talking about a Heimdall upstream. Does Heimdall have an upstream?
Well, kind of. I think so. Yeah,
Yes,
they do.
It's
Right.
not active, but they do.
Yeah.
Sorry.
So yeah. So I had to say that. I know. Yeah, so they have an upstream. Yeah. Okay. Right. Anything else? Oh.
Yeah, welcome to SDC, for those of you who haven't been here before. You might not be aware that there's an open house at the Plugfest reception on Monday night. And a lot of the people in this room obviously know each other and participating in the Plugfest. If you don't know, if you're interested in various SMB implementations, strongly encourage you to go down there. It's right at the bottom of the escalator, just take a right. And of course at STC here, we always strongly encourage the hallway track, which is get together, get Valve outside, you can pound on it and get anything you want out of it. And one more thing, as you notice, I'm nudging people a little bit. For the recordings, we really strongly ask you to repeat the questions or at least summarize if there's a conversation. Thanks.
Okay. Thanks. So I'm done. Thank you very much.